Koreans work hard and they party hard.
They party hard as well, yeah.
Party hard as well. So the head of the military is the famous Chung-Hee.
Chung-Hee is the head of Chung-Hee.
Yeah. The former government that is hell-bent for transforming the economy. And this economic board is the one that would come up with 5-year economic plans, which used to be chaired by General Park Chung-Hee. Like every month,
that General Park would even encourage competition among the leading chaebols, and they were also given quotas, something like export quotas, I think.
This guy was a benevolent dictator. The guy who bullied people into doing the right thing.
On the industrialization journey of Korea.
Yes.
Like from your own experience there, because I think your master's was also in...
Kotra was very, very instrumental in helping Korean companies to go outside Korea.
It's almost quite similar to what the Singaporeans have.
It's owned by Japanese called Soga Shosha, the trading company, like where now I currently work.
But also master's level and PhD is really rigorous in Far East Asia, especially China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore.
So you're living in a country where they don't have natural resources. So the only resource they have is human capital. Now come to class. If you slack, you're going to be the last. You have 50 of them with 96, 95, 96, 95.
If you are not used to the culture, you might think maybe it's because you are black.
It's rapid in the sense that it's been always referred to as the miracle on the Han River.
We talked about how there was a miracle on the Rhine River in Germany. So in West Germany, so it's always called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle.
Korea was colonized by Japan. They kind of borrowed a lot from Japan.
The proximity to the US and Japan, that also played a role.
Samsung essentially was a copycat of Sony. Hyundai copied Toyotas. Well, the third factor was how the Chaebols.
The Chaebols, exactly. And in Japan, you had the ZAIBATSU, Keiretsu.
People know Samsung as Samsung Electronics. This Samsung CNT Corporation, this Samsung shipbuilding, insurance, and healthcare, energy.
It was a system of cutoffs, but a positive way of cutoffs.
They're the Korea Advanced Institute of
Science and Technology.
If you look at the amount of research papers professors used to do, like in a semester, if you go to these, even KAIST or these top universities, you'll have, let's say Samsung has a complex over there.
Within a university,
where they're challenging students. You look at the history of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Stanford University used to have huge tracts of land, and it would invite companies to come and set up shop over there with the idea that...
Once again, I'll go back to the Singapore story.
Yes, yeah.
He talks about his earlier travels to Africa. This Confucian mindset of, let's say, even approaching work, the work ethic itself. In Japan, I think we have the Karoshi, Gwarosa, I think in South Korea.
Did you witness it? I did.
Welcome to a new episode on the Nubianometry podcast, episode 009. And today we have a very fascinating guest, I must honestly say. He's named after a philosopher, so you know the discussion today is going to be very philosophical and intellectual at the very least. So his name is Socrates Luseka, and he's an international trade expert. He studied in Korea and also lived there for a while. We will be talking about the industrialization of Korea and many insights that Kenya as a country can actually learn from that. We'll also cover topics to do with questions like, for instance, can Kenya actually industrialize? Because a lot of people always ask themselves, like, is industrialization past African countries? Can the Asian miracles of the newly industrialized economies, the NIEs, or the Asian tigers, can they be actually replicated in a continent like Africa? We'll also look at closer home questions like the Konza Technopolis, because our guest also worked at the Korean Trade Agency, the trade section of the Korean Embassy in Nairobi. And one of his duties while he was there was as the program manager of the Korean Development Assistance at the Konza Technopolis. So there are people who argue that Konza Technopolis is a white elephant. Some people say it hasn't really taken off. Some people talk about the proximity to Tatu City, which is a private, almost similar smart city project or a Technopolis kind of project. And we will also cover general topics on international trade, things like BRICS, de-dollarization, and many other more. So if you don't want to miss a very intellectually packed conversation for the next 1 hour, kindly stay hooked and watch until the very end. So having done the introduction, I think we'll go now to my guest for today, Socrates Luseka. Socrates,
Yes.
thank you very much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you as well for having me.
I don't know if my introduction did you justice.
It did.
Do you want to add anything maybe by way of introduction?
Just maybe Socrates.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I mean, like, you are named after an ancient Greek philosopher.
Thanks to my parents.
Thanks to your parents.
Yes.
And the question would be, are your parents academics? How is it that they came to name you after a philosopher?
Really, my mom was interested in philosophy as well as history. So when she was in college, she read a lot about Greek philosophy. And then her thinking was, if I name my son after this philosopher, perhaps he might end up being a special person in the future. So that's why she decided to name me, give me that name.
Okay. So let's just get into the brass tacks. You studied in Korea and lived there for 3 years. How was your experience in Korea? Maybe if we start on a slow roll.
Yeah, it was, I usually say those 3 years were some of the best years of my life. It was my first time living outside my country. Essentially, I was there for my master's, and the kind of education that I was subjected to was really, really nice compared to the undergraduate degree that I did here. The kind of professors that taught me were top-notch professors to a good institution. On top of that, I met a lot of foreign friends. Because in my class, I used to have people from North America, South America, Asian countries, and then it was really, really, other than immersing myself in Korean culture and learning more about the people, the languages, the food, I was able to also learn about other countries, other cultures, because of the environment that I was in. And so, yeah, that was my experience. It was really, really nice.
It was really nice, yeah. Was it rigorous?
It wasn't really rigorous because I was there for 3 years. So,
No, I mean the academic side of things.
but the academic side of things, it was, the first year was a bit rigorous, yes, because I was taking a lot of courses. And then now the second year, I was fully focused on doing my thesis. So I wasn't involved. I was involved with other things as well that might start this year. So I'd say it wasn't that much rigorous. It was manageable.
Because there's this stereotype, or you can say mindset, where people talk a lot about how rigorous academia, especially higher levels of education, undergrad, but also master's level and PhD, is really rigorous in Far East Asia, especially China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore. And I have a couple of friends at the moment, like when you were in Germany, so they're studying in Hong Kong, and they always tell me how difficult and rigorous the system is. And I even remember when I was in Germany, like doing my intensive language course in the higher levels, we had, I think, 2 or 3 classmates from South Korea. And I once asked one of them, she was a girl called Hanji. I asked her, like, I read a lot about how, I don't know, like students even stay until nighttime, and even in primary school, and you are doing, I don't know, like 16 hours. And I was like, how?
I guess where you're coming from. Yeah, I actually had not, when I was answering my question, I didn't answer it with that approach. Yes, if you have to look at it that way, to a bit intense. And I'm saying that because you're living in a country where they don't have natural resources. So the only resource they have is human capital. And with that, as a Korean, you have to study really, really hard because there's a lot of competition from. And sort of that permeates into the institutions that we find ourselves in. To give you an example, how driven and how hardworking Koreans, give you an example of our school used to have a football team. I play football. We used to play with other universities nearby and clubs, local clubs, and there's a specific Korean club that came to play with us. And we hammered them like 5 goals, but it was the most tiring game I've ever played. These days are not playing like they were playing, like they would tie you to the ball.
Like their life depended on
It's
it,
like their life depends.
or like it was our World Cup final.
Exactly. And that's now is reflected into other facets of society. Now come to class. If you slack, you're going to be the last. Now remember, you worked really hard. You've been reading throughout the semester and you have an 80%, so 85%. I think you have a lot of it done really well. You look at Koreans, you have 50 of them with 96, 95, 96, 95. So
It's like their standard of success is much, much different than what we have in, let's say, in Africa.
And I'm talking about the people who have this 96, and these are evening class students. They have families, they have their day jobs. So you wonder like how they're able to juggle all these and still produce a very good results. It was really, really fascinating. Yeah. So that pressure is there. Like it just gets into you. You find yourself working hard as well. Yeah. So that's how I can explain the rigorous aspect of my experience.
And do you find that, was there like a chasm or a divide between, let's say, international students and the Korean students? Because for me, I think we experience a lot of it in Germany. But then I hear the one in Asia, because like some of my friends in Hong Kong, they're telling me, for instance, like if you didn't understand something in class, because they've had to do a lot of calculus and stuff like that, and you're coming from a social sciences background, you didn't expect to do such kind of a thing in, let's say, Hong Kong or in Korea or whatever.
Yeah.
One of my friends from Ghana was telling me, like, if you didn't understand something in class, and maybe you asked some of your Chinese or let's say even Asian, like Korean, Japanese classmates, hey, can you take 1 hour after class to show me XYZ? They all tell you, sorry, I don't have time. If you are not used to the culture, you might think maybe it's because you are black or you are an international student, maybe from Latin America, etc. But then he told me slowly by slowly came to understand that because of the fierce competitive nature of their academia, somebody thinks that it's a trade-off. The 1 hour they'll use to help you out in a particular subject, they will have been using it themselves to better their grades or understanding. So I don't know, maybe if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, I really didn't have that kind of experience. It could be because the kind of institute, the university that I went to, majority of the students are foreign students. So we only had a few, like 40% of the student body was Korean students there. And then the Koreans who were there were so keen on making friends. The idea of them having international foreign friends. So whenever, let's say you'd have an issue with regards to maybe you didn't understand anything in class and then they thought like a Korean would help, they would be warm and willing to help you. But I think it's because I did experience that, because like I told you, my university is slightly different from other universities where majority of students are always foreign students. And I think it's true. You might experience that because these guys are always,
it's very highly competitive.
It's very,
and if you don't understand the culture, you might think these guys are snobbing you. Yes, I'm sure there's outlets.
Snobbish and not known that. That's just how the culture is and how they take way to their own.
So to touch a little bit on the industrialization journey of Korea.
Yes.
Like from your own experience there, because I think your master's was also in international development policy, and development economics, something like that. So probably you will also be best placed maybe to try and explain a little bit of the history of how they industrialized. So what will be like your general take on the path that they took towards industrialization, which was very rapid, to be honest?
Yeah, it's rapid in the sense that it's been always referred to as the miracle on the Han River, basically because within 50 years, they're able to industrialize, and that's something that even the Western economies are not being able to. Anyway, before I really give you the factors why that contributed to that.
And let me just to jump in shortly. So, because I was reading about the phrase miracle on the Han River, and I discovered that actually, I think one of the Korean leaders at the time, before General Park came in, he talked about how there was a miracle on the Rhine River in Germany. So in West Germany, so it's always called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. And so a lot of it was within the Rhine-Gebiet, like areas in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany and parts of southern Germany, where the Rhine River actually crosses or flows along. And so they were like, yeah, because the Germans had their economic miracle in the 50s, so us as Korea, we need to try and have our own miracle of the 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
They kind of borrowed that concept from Germans. I think so. Yeah. So interesting. So I was telling you, if I delve into that, and I'll just give you a normal view of Korea. Yeah. Before that transformation started, you have to know that Korea was colonized by Japan. Yeah. That was between 1910 and 1945. So if you later trace their development, they kind of borrow a lot from Japan as a country. So 1945 happens, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, then Korea gains independence, and the Korean peninsula, North and South Korea, they're together at that point. And then 1950 happens, the Cold War catches up, ideological differences between leaders, and you have two factions, the communists and the capitalists. Yeah, Korea War starts 1850 to 1853. And then after that, Korea as a country now is really burnt, like very, very devastated. And even North Korea is a bit better than South Korea. And 1953 to around 1961, the kind of leadership that they had wasn't as promising. There was a lot of corruption around that time. So the military decided that we can't put up with this. So there was a coup in 1861, and now the military came to power. And the head of the military is the famous Park Chung-Hee. Park Chung-Hee is the head of Park Chung-Hee, yeah, who is now the father of that transformation that you will normally hear about. So they come to power, and then now a lot of things start happening. First of all, they form a government that is hell-bent on transforming the economy. They really want to catch up to North Korea. They don't want to be vulnerable. So this government, first of all, they come up with a number of changes. One of them is establishing the economic board. And then this economic board is the one that would come up with 5-year economic plans, which used to be chaired by General Park Chung-Hee. Like every month, they would go through these decisions that they've come out together with and review and see where things are going to the media plan. So they would have these 5-year economic plans, and then it is the one that used to guide the country into that path they took over. And then this stage that was in power was heavily interventionist, and they did a lot of central planning. So you'd find even the commercial banks were nationalized. Everything was under the control of this regime. And it's what you would say, this guy was a benevolent dictator. Yeah, benevolent dictator, exactly. The guy who bullied people into doing the right thing. With that kind of leadership where they know where they're going, and then now they're putting in place institutions to ensure that whatever they're planning, it's going as the way they want it. And then they also went ahead to invest in infrastructure, necessary infrastructure to help the country get to its back. Yeah, so that is one of the major factors that contributed to the transformation. Having a very, very intentional leadership, the political will was there, the things to happen. The other thing that now was very crucial was this policy of export-oriented industrialization. Yeah. And import substitution. Exactly. Yeah. So government realizes South Korea is in a way small market. We don't have enough resources. We have to be innovative before we do to thrive. So what they do is they come up with ideas on how to make this export industrialization happen, where they subsidize local industries. They bring about incentives essentially to local companies to compete globally. First of all, giving them credit. For example, like I told you, they nationalize commercial banks, so they're the ones who white to. This money is going to this company because this company is supposed to produce this number of goods so that you can meet the 5-year economic plans here. So that's what they did. So the raw materials that were being imported, they were not subjected to any tariffs because they would come in and produce whatever products that are needed to be exported. And also around that time, where I used to work, Kotra, was established there. Kotra was very, very instrumental in helping Korean companies to go outside Korea. Out is really exactly what they used to do was more like an embassy. It had a branch in each and every region around the world. So they would do market research to look at where these products and commodities that are being produced in Korea, where they could be sold. And then in addition to doing market research, they also used to do matchmaking. So matchmaking basically having forums like expos, B2Bs to be forums, exactly where they would get Korean companies to meet local businesses so that they could sell. So Kotra really did something important. So that, I think
it's almost quite similar to what the Singaporeans had.
Exactly.
Because when you read Lee Kuan Yew's The Singapore Story, he talks about their economic development board and how they will actually send them abroad to try and gain like market intelligence basically on where once we produce certain goods, where are we going to sell them and how easy we need to be to sell them in those places.
Exactly, yeah. So that was, Kotra was instrumental. And then another thing was, it's owned by Japanese called Soga Shosha, the trading company. Yeah. Like where now I currently work. The POSCO, the Samsung Select type operation came up with, so that all of these trading companies is essentially to help Korean manufacturers to sell outside in other markets. Also, that's the second factor, export-oriented internationalization. And then on the third factor was how the Chaebols,
the Chaebols, exactly. Actually, it's a point I wanted to come to. Yeah, because once you mentioned Japan, and in Japan, you had the ZAIBATSU, Keiretsu, and you had some of the leaders of the Chaebols. I think during the colonization of South Korea, a lot of them had kind of worked in Japan.
Actually, some of these, the founders or these Chaebols, for instance, Samsung, I think they worked for the ZAIBATSU. The ZAIBATSU in Japan, yeah. The Hyundai founded, they founded Hyundai, also worked there. So that's why they were able to. Anyway, going back to why the Chaebols were a huge part in that transformation. Yeah. I just, for your listeners who may not understand what Chaebols are, these are conglomerates. And how conglomerates function, it's a group where under it, you have like 10 or 50 companies existing. So they're everywhere. For instance, I can give you, it's Samsung. People know Samsung as Samsung Electronics. Yeah. But there are other, the Samsung CNT Corporation, the Samsung Shipbuilding, the Samsung Insurance, it's in healthcare, energy, all over.
So they're in multiple sectors, industries.
Multiple sectors in industry. And also another thing that people maybe know or don't know is these Chaebols have invested heavily around the world. Yeah, for example, Samsung, maybe it has a plant somewhere in South America, in Europe, and Vietnam, all over there. Other than Samsung, I can also give you an example. The company that I work is part of a chip. Yeah, it's called POSCO International. A POSCO grain division we have like a grain terminal in Ukraine, a big grain terminal in Ukraine where we are able to get wheat from Ukrainian farmers. Yeah, and then we store there, we are able to sell globally. We have a rice processing plant in Myanmar. We have gas fields over there. So we're big. And then we have like a huge palm oil plantation in Indonesia, where we have been able to plant our own palm oil, and then we are able to harvest and sell it to the Indonesian market as well as other markets around the world.
So it means to, let's say, solidify your market share globally, you also carry out pretty much heavy investments in target countries. It's not only like some of, let's say, Western companies where we're just coming and trading and taking the minerals out and leaving.
We also need minerals. Yeah, even in minerals.
Or even like food products, let's say the rice you're talking about, palm oil.
We invest heavily along the supply chain. Yeah, and given that picture, you can imagine the amount of revenue generated outside Korea when these big conglomerates, exactly, when that translates to the taxpayer back in Korea. You can imagine the amount of money that we're able to repatriate back home, exactly back home. So the president back then, General Park Chung-Hee, knew the potential of Chaebols, and so he really, really supported them. So in terms of giving the credit from these commercial banks so that they can carry out their production, and also ensuring that giving the tax breaks, things like those, and then land, so that support that the government gave Chaebols really transformed the economy, because they were able to export a lot globally, they were able to invest a lot globally, and not ensure that foreign currency would come, and then also offering a lot of employment to Korean people. Or the human capital development, which was headed by the government. The government.
Maybe before you talk about the fourth factor, still on the third factor, the Chaebols, there's a time I think I read something that I found to be quite interesting, that General Park would even encourage competition among the leading Chaebols, and they were also given quotas, something like export quotas. I think you had alluded to that a little bit earlier. So it will tell you, like, we give you all these incentives, cheap credit, we give you land, we give you XYZ, but you have to export, I don't know, 100,000 electronics annually. And next year, you have to do something more. And then you will create a kind of competition among the leading Chaebols to ensure that actually they were delivering.
That's very true. Remember, there was an economic board that was setting targets. And some of these targets were, let's say in a year, how much are we able to export? And let's say you're producing this type of cars. We're giving you now back to the Chaebols, for example, Hyundai, they're giving you this amount of money in condition that these are the amount of productivity you're supposed to eat.
The amount of units, let's say, you have to produce and export.
So there were conditions, and that made them to be on their toes and do the best with the resources that they've been given by the government. And then the fact that you had like more than 10 Chaebols, there was no monopoly in the market. And then, I've told you these Chaebols were in almost each industry. And because each Chaebol goes in each and every industry, definitely they were in the same industry.
Yeah.
So there was that
internal industry, like within an industry competition.
Yeah, so they were really, you understand how the free market works. Where there's competition, there's productivity. Yeah, so you're right.
And even the customers actually gain a lot more because of pricing. Yeah, and the prices have to go down so that you can win more customers and the market share.
Yes. So yeah, you really equated that.
Yeah. And then just before you go to the fourth point, which I think is human capital, one of the questions I might have for you, like, there's always the argument about the farm size, the size of the farm or a company, etc. And if you look at, let's say, our experience in a country like Kenya, there was a time I was looking at the farm size, the biggest companies in Kenya and how many employees, for instance, they employ. And you'll take something like Safaricom, which is, the government has a lot of stake in it, but their employees, I don't know, are only 6,000. EABL, which you can say it's purely private, I think.
Yes.
In terms of employees, maybe 2,000. And then they have a chain of distributors, etc. The biggest numbers I was seeing were parastatals, like KPLC, I think it was 9,000. Kenya Pipeline, I think maybe 4,000 or 5,000. So anyway, there was no company that you could say had, let's say, 15,000 employees and above. And so there's always this argument. For instance, I don't know if you know Vusi Tembekwayo, the South African venture capitalist. He's a life coach, among many other things. So there's one TEDx presentation he made back in 2013, 2014, I think. And he was talking about small size farms, MSMEs. Like, they're really not a solution in Africa if you look at it keenly. So it's a different topic. But do you think, like, farm size, if you take, like, let's say the ZAIBATSU in Japan and then the Chaebols in South Korea, that part of the industrialization story in those two countries can be linked to, let's say, the size of the farm or the conglomerate?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if I've understood this correctly. Yeah, more is the bigger the farm, the advantages to them. Basically, economies of scale. Things like those.
You can buy in volume, let's say raw materials, and you can even negotiate better prices.
Exactly. Yeah, which now, because of that economics of scale, they're going to be efficient.
Yeah,
in the delivery of their services or in the products that they manufacture. But also my understanding of the size of a company, basically the bigger it is, the more it is able to employ more people.
Yeah.
So I think from that.
Yeah, because I've had arguments where people say, let's say, a lot of international Western, let's say, development agencies, including, let's say, the Bretton Woods, they always talk about MSME promotion a lot. And people are like, yeah, in Africa, in Latin America, we have to support the MSMEs. You see, there's so many projects in the World Bank by many development agencies from the West, and they strongly focus on MSMEs. And some people argue, if you look at the industrialization at least in South Korea, and even the resurgence of Japan after World War II, once again, the ZAIBATSU, and maybe also in Taiwan with like TSMC, like one company which is, I don't know, delivering how much percentage of the GDP. Like the bigger the firm, it's much more easier to use that as the foundation, the base of the pyramid. And then slowly as the country starts to industrialize, then the MSMEs will now pop up strongly.
So that's what is happening to Korea. Now you have any SAGAT or SXs coming up because they lead the ground have been sort of set in motion. Yeah, they're the bigger companies. It's something we want more. But also another thing that I'd see is in the early stages, the small, medium-sized companies, it's much harder for them to compete globally compared to these bigger companies. Like actually, bigger economies of scale, they're able to be cheap. Because of that, they're able to fight fairly in the international market. Yeah. But then these small companies, they're still grappling the high cost of production, where in the end, they find that the product that they come up with is much, much expensive. They're obligated to sell it at an expensive. And now when you're competing with other products globally, which are cheaper, you just cannot compete. You cannot compete. And so let's say
we need to go the South Korean way, Chaebols. Okay, so that was a detour from the fourth point you attempt to make about human capital. So maybe let's return back to it.
So the government heavily invested in education, and looking at the time that the economy was taking, there was a special scheme that was needed in the economy. And speaking about now at human capital, the segment that they targeted at education in training, but they heavily invested in that area. You also need these TVETs.
So the people were really standing on the assembly line.
Exactly, in that huge factory. Exactly, yeah. So the government really invested in that, and they were really in transforming this tech and in the heavy industry. The other thing...
were they closely linked to the Chaebols also?
Exactly. There was this industry academia.
Yeah, so that you have academia to the industry pipeline.
Exactly. There were those initiatives that have been set in motion by the government to encourage the industry to partner with. So for instance, you'll have this group of Chaebols. Maybe they will tell the governments, the best or the planning that you have, we will lead this amount of people in this section. So they'll go to a training to the Tibet, and they will tell the Tibet to do this amount of people. So they train this amount of people, which upon graduation, they'll automatically go to the. So there was that inequality between the industry and cross coordination, place coordination. The government is really integral in ensuring that happened.
So it was almost like in a positive way, because this word is always used in a negative way when talking about, let's say, the colonial period in Africa. It was a system of cutoffs, but a positive way of cutoffs. Like, we need this particular number to go to this Chaebol over the next couple of years. We have to deliver that number.
Look at it in the positive. But still on the human capital, they came up with institutions and that will meet the needs of the economy. For instance, there was this, I don't know if you've heard of KAIST. KAIST, yeah, they're the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology.
They're supposed to be doing something at Kansas City, which will come to shortly in the conversation, right?
So KAIST was integral in the tech ecosystem at a time where its mandate was to produce engineers to address this segment of the market, the labor market that was needed to transform the economy at that time. So the deliberate creation of such institutions and then supporting the R&D was really, really crucial. I think that's a small segment of human capital development that changed the game. I can tell you, for instance, Korea is amongst the developed countries, the country that heavily invests in R&D, immense Korea. I remember even in university where I studied, if you look at the amount of research papers professors used to do, like in a semester, alongside the teaching they were doing, it was a lot. And it was a lot in the sense that the government pumped a lot of money. There was a lot of funding for them to do. And because of that, there are a lot of ground-breaking innovation in different sectors. So it really started from the get, from back then. And it's one of the factors that really helped.
And so I can imagine in the budgets of the Chaebols, the R&D divisions always get a very huge chime.
The beauty about that is, if you go to these, even KAIST or these top universities, you'll have, let's say Samsung has a complex over there. Within a university, where they're challenging students to come up with solutions that maybe could address some of the issues by going through as a campaign. So you see how that industry and academia are very closely intertwined. That's South Korea.
Yeah, because I know there's, I don't know, like Samsung was even building, is it a science park, which is like a city or something?
Yeah. I think it's something that you can also trace back to, if you look at the history of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
When Stanford University, at the beginning of, I think around 2010, when now Silicon Valley is coming up, Stanford University used to have huge tracts of land, and it would invite companies to come and set up shop over there with the idea that you will absorb our students. The HPs, Hewlett-Packard,
Bell Technologies, the early 60s, all the breakthroughs that were being made, a lot of them were like closely connected to Stanford University.
Some of them were given land. And that's how Civic Party came out to be. Yeah, so it's in a similar manner. That's the leakage between universities giving land to you. Or just emphasizing the R&D aspect of human capital development and how to interact.
So in your assessment, these are the main 4 factors that somebody could, let's say, look to in terms of the industrialization of Korea.
Then there is another 5th factor, which is important, yes. The foreign aid and investment. Yeah, can't worry about from the US and Japan. Do you remember 1950, Korea more the countries on its knees, devastated there, and the Americans really pumped a lot of aid into that country. Yeah. And then now when the military government came to power, they renewed their relationship with Japan. Remember the previous government didn't want anything to do with Japan because of the colonization. But Park Chung-Hee realized the importance of having Japan was to you. So because of that renewed relations, even Japan decided to give them, I think, repatriation money. And then they used that money to build POSCO Steel. So POSCO Steel actually, it's a mother company, and it's the largest steel producer in Korea. Established that steel plant, and that steel plant is the now supplying steel to these bigger companies, the Handes, the Samsung. So you see that way.
Lucky Gold Star. I didn't know that was the abbreviation of LG. I thought it was a Korean abbreviation or something of the sort. Daegun and many others.
Exactly. So the thing is, they use that aid or donation in the night way. Yeah. So I think that they used it wisely and they used it twice a year. So even though it was someone who did say it's a factor, but
it was also an aspect. I also think in terms of, let's say, the proximity to the US and Japan, that also played a role, and proximity to the US because of the historical reasons, and the US supporting the South Koreans in the Korean Civil War. And some people argue that this closeness actually enabled South Korean goods to get market access in the US, but also in Japan. And so when these two economies were really at the top of the world, South Korea was easily integrated into global supply chains, especially of middle tech to high tech goods.
Sure, these are the primary markets, though, given the good relations they already had with the US. I remember even before they had gone to high tech, all these textiles and wigs, they used to send it to US by so you're right.
That market access played a huge role.
And another thing that is usually downplayed is the rule of Japan culture. The fact that this teacher was more modeled on the Japanese ZAIBATSU. Exactly. So Samsung essentially was a copycat of Sony. But now it's much bigger than even Sony. Exactly. Hyundai copied Toyota there. It's a Kia. Probably also Nissan or something. They actually imported a lot of this parent EHE in Korea, and I started working in it, tinkering with it until they were able to find their own voice.
Quite interesting. Yeah. You just mentioned briefly culture, especially as regards the ZAIBATSU that's in Japan. How about the broader sense of culture? Because once again, I'll go back to Lee Kuan Yew, the Singapore story. Yes, yeah. He talks about his earlier travels to Africa. And there's a story I think he makes. He went to Nigeria on his way to Ghana, and he talks about one of the ministers in Nigeria. He was like, "We've done enough for the country. I just want to open my shoe factory." And he was like, "It will be really hard to actually find common ground with leaders in Africa, if I may put it that way." And then it says he moved on to Ghana, and 3 days later after he had arrived in Ghana, I think there was a coup in Nigeria, and this particular minister he was killed, he was assassinated. Okay. And in Ghana, of course, there was one of the corrupt ministers, very corrupt. He will take you on his yacht. Back then, I think in the mid-60s, 66, 67, and he will always be asking for bribes and stuff like that. So Lee Kuan Yew draws a conclusion that for Singapore, the Confucian mindset or the Confucian culture, I think some people say even Confucianism super spreads into Japan and the Korean Peninsula. Do you think this Confucian mindset of, let's say, even approaching work, the work ethic itself in Japan, and I think also in South Korea, in Japan, I think we have the Karoshi, Gwarosa, I think in South Korea, where people literally work themselves to death, or people who spend 16 hours at work, and on their way home, they're sleeping, they get out of a metro, and they just collapse on the side of the street. You think maybe also that one, if you look at it in that particular way in terms of the work ethic and the Confucian mindset, is something that maybe in Africa was entirely missing, but like in some of these Far East Asian countries, it was so widespread, and that one coupled with, let's say, all the other 4 reasons that you mentioned, provided a very good mix, a good soup, let's say, for the food to actually stew it.
Exactly. I think if you look at the Confucian values, some of the tenets that formed around the areas to education, giving importance to education. And then the other thing would be discipline and hierarchy. And another thing would be hard work and work ethic. And the other one would be collective good as opposed to individualism. Yeah.
Which we got from the West, a lot of it. Because even if you go 100 years back, we also had some of that collective, the Ubuntu kind of.
And then that kind of collective good, and I feel like it's one of the things that hierarchy and tossing out corruption is you're doing this for everyone. You're not amassing wealth for your own, oneself. You're doing things with the community in mind. Yeah. So let's say someone whichever product they're coming, they have the thought that we are going to benefit society, and they look at society. Anyway, but going back to that Gwarosa thing, what you mentioned, like it's in their blood.
Did you witness it?
I did. These guys, I even witness it where I work. The fact that all my working life I worked for Koreans, I say it, like Koreans,
somebody does work for 15 hours.
Koreans work hard. And then this is the most crazy thing I usually tell people. Koreans work hard and they party hard.
They party hard as well, yeah.
Party hard as well. So you'll find that this company is someone you regard with Koreans and go out drinking and moving from club to club, club hopping like the whole night. But I tell you, 6 a.m. in the office.
Oh, the work ethic part kicks in.
Exactly. The work ethic kicks in. You'll find your boss on that place at 6 a.m. working and work until maybe something like 7 a.m. They really work hard. And then also it's at Confucian, like up to you, they put a lot of emphasis on the education. Yeah. So everyone has to be educated. Education is really, really important. Collective good, doing things for everyone, not just for me. And also now, basically that Gwarosa, that working hard, like, which has a downside to that. Yeah, it has positives and negatives because we find like the highest mistake rates. Yeah. You've got the range of fun and Korea. Yeah.
But also taking responsibility. Like you hear somebody's accused of corruption, and before he even waits for an investigation, they just decide to off themselves.
So you find them standing in, like coming out and just offering atomic apology. I'm very sorry, I'm embarrassed. I ask you to forgive me and step down and allow investigations to be done. That's what someone would be me.